Hello and welcome to episode 172 of the Book Binge for another book review, this time covering the relatively recently completed New Spring prequel for The Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan, a book that I enjoyed very much and also read a lot more quickly than I had anticipated. This was supposed to have 3 spoiler talk slash Wheel of Time diary videos on the channel just a few weeks ago. It turned out only having 2 because I read it quickly enough where that could be the case, which also caused for my video schedule to be reshuffled. But that is all besides the point. This video is reviewing this in a spoiler-free context because I've already spent 2 videos basically discussing the spoilers of it. New Spring to me is an underrated book. I think it is overly maligned by the community. Maybe that's because I read it after book 5 as opposed to a lot of other people who read it probably after book 10, like in the published order. I can say this book was great. It followed a lot of what I wanted it to follow. It executed on what it was doing quite well. And the complaints that people generally pose to it, or the things that people like point out, are like, oh, that's the dress shopping book kind of thing, are really dumb complaints in my personal opinion. Sorry, I'm not trying to call anybody who thinks that dumb, but I just found the complaints to be a little bit silly, at least as far as, my personal taste is concerned. But we'll talk about all of that and a little bit more. Now, this will have like minor spoilers for the book. This review will have like kind of very minor spoilers sprinkled throughout. Some of these things are kind of implied because if you're watching a review for this, I assume that you have at least read through the first 5 books of the series, so there are going to be some things that are spoiled for sure from the first 5 books of The Wheel of Time, because this is a prequel and expands upon the main series in such a way that I'm going to be kind of referring to some of those things. This book itself is kind of minorly spoiled, quote unquote, in certain regards because of, well, having familiar characters, and we kind of know certain things about them from the main series as opposed to this. So, take any of that as you will. If you really, really don't like spoilers, just don't watch this video. But if you're fine with kind of minor stuff, or if you've read through the first 5 books of the main series, you should be fine, because I'm not going to make really in-depth reference to all the spoiler stuff, but like, I can't really talk about the prequel and make some of the points that I want to make without referencing a little bit from the main series. But anyway, let's get back on like I was trying to do with the good. The setting for the book is great because it starts off basically right at the point in time that Rand, as the Dragon Reborn, is born. It starts off with this in the first couple of chapters. That's the setting of the book, following characters from the main series. The most notable ones being Lan, and he's not really followed super closely in the first like 2/3 of the book. It's mostly in the last third that he's explored. But Moraine and Swan are the main ones. So Moraine, the main Aes Sedai that we are accustomed to dealing with through the first 5 books, the primary one, the one that finds Rand and Matt and Perrin in the first book, and then also Swan Sanche, who is the Amyrlin during that time of the main series. We're following those characters 20 years before the main series because, of course, this is right around when Rand is being born, and therefore this is when the girls are a little bit younger. Moraine and Swan are in the White Tower, training to become full Aes Sedai. That is the conceit of this book, or at least of the first couple thirds of it, and I thought the setting and the characters and everything being explored in it was fantastic. The setting was great. The plot itself was great. I just generally love the conceit of the book. That's what the first 2/3 of this is all about, is in the White Tower. And I thought that the setting of it all and the execution of it all, being able to see a little bit more of the lore, not necessarily so much history, but a little bit more of the lore and the practices and the standard doings and testings and stuff like this of the Aes Sedai is great. We got to explore a little bit of this in like the Great Hunt and the Dragon Reborn, if I'm remembering correctly, with having Egwene and Nynaeve both test to become accepted, rise from novice to accepted. This book we get a little bit more of the accepted to full Aes Sedai stuff, so we get to see a little bit more, like I said, of what's going on in the tower. We get to see a little bit more of that political structure. We get to see some actions of Aes Sedai who we recognize from the main series as well, not just, of course, Moraine and Swan, but some other names that we get to recognize and be like, I know that character. This kind of influences that relationship. This contextualizes certain relationships and certain events from the main series in ways that are great. That's something that New Spring does really, really well. And overall, I think the storytelling is great. Not only is New Spring like 1/3 the length of any of the three books from Shadow Rising, Fires of Heaven, or Lord of Chaos, its pacing is also pretty great. It has a similar pacing style to the way that Jordan does with any of those other books that I've read so far, but because it's so short, it feels like it's blistering speed, and there's honestly something that's really nice about that. The fact that I was able to read this book in a week as opposed to a month or 2 months uh, is honestly great. It was a great way to kind of refresh myself on reading the series and get myself once again very excited to read Lord of Chaos very soon. But most of what I want to praise is this conceit. The last third of the novel kind of does something a little bit different. There are some big events that occur a little over halfway through that I'm not going to spoil, of course, but that kind of drive some of the characters to go out and do something a little bit go out and do things on their own, we'll say, and therefore you get a little bit of converging plot lines. This is most particularly where Moraine and Lan are concerned, because of course we know in the main series Lan is Moraine's warder, so this book actually sets that up and has that event happen, basically leading up to those characters meeting, and also up to the point that Moraine bonds Lan. And like I said, it's kind of a spoiler for the book, sort of, but like it's also the most emotionally poignant part of the book. You have a great climax. One of the things that I loved the most about New Spring was it's the best example of Jordan going from it doesn't seem like a climax is happening soon, I'm kind of worried, to oh wait, tensions are rising now, to boom, there's the climax. Some of the other books where the climax is a little bit more explosive that way kind of don't have the best build up, where I felt like it really worked. For the most part, Jordan's climaxes that I've enjoyed a little bit more have been the more drawn out ones. This was the quick climax that I enjoyed a lot, and following that climax is a lot of when this Moraine and Lan, well, it's basically around the climax, both before and after, when Moraine and Lan have certain interactions that are great. Character interactions in general are great because Moraine and Swan have great interactions. Being able to get to see the expansions of these characters when they're a little bit younger, a little bit more immature, a little bit less experienced is really, really insightful. Strangely insightful considering how different they overall are in the main series. It's something that I just really, really enjoyed getting to follow. But I will talk a little bit on the bad. There's not really too much that I would personally complain about in regards to New Spring, and a lot of that is simply because I enjoyed it so much. Plenty of that's because it's short, so there's not as much to potentially go wrong as there are in many of the books in the main series. But a lot of this just comes down to the fact that nothing was really wrong with it. It was so tightly done, and that I just couldn't complain about it. The main things that I've heard other people complain about it are more concerned with like the way that Moraine seems a little bit more childish. She doesn't really seem like the woman that she is in the main series, which I'm not inclined to complain about, because of course the book starts with her and Swan both being accepted. They aren't even full Aes Sedai at the start of the book, so like of course they're a little bit less mature. They're still young, they're still inexperienced. Like, it's no different than following the girls in the main series, who are even younger and more immature, of course, but like these girls still haven't really experienced a whole lot, so them being a little bit different than they are in the main series makes sense. There's 20 years and a lot of Aes Sedai maturity going on in there that kind of changes things a bit. The other main complaint that I've seen people levy at New Spring is, like I said earlier in the video, oh, this is the dress shopping book. That was one chapter, and I didn't even realize that I was in the middle of the chapter that people make such a fuss about until I was over halfway through the chapter, when it suddenly clicked, and I'm just like, oh, this is the chapter that people don't like. And like, it's not that bad. If that is the worst thing that this book has to offer, this book doesn't have very much bad to offer. It's genuinely not bad at all, and the shopping is also plot relevant, and if you don't understand how that could be the case, read the book and it's quite obvious how that is the case. It simply is. And like, it's fine. It is totally fine. Like, if that is the thing that people are making such a fuss about, New Spring is a great book, because there's there's nothing wrong with that scene really. Like maybe it goes on over long, but the interactions are great. Swan and Moraine interacting is great. Getting the diversity between how they view everything on account of their backgrounds, despite being best friends who've gone through the journey in the White Tower essentially identically together, is all great. Like I really enjoyed the book, so I don't think I would personally really include anything in the bad, except for the fact that I think the back half is a little bit slower than the front half. I preferred the White Tower stuff as opposed to the not White Tower stuff in the book overall, but like it's all good enough that I'm not really inclined to complain too much anyway. As for the ugly, I'm mostly just disappointed that we won't get more prequel stuff. Of course, Robert Jordan passed away before he could even finish the series. Brandon Sanderson ended up finishing the last 3 books of the series, but that meant that the rest of the prequels that Jordan had planned, because I believe he had this plan for at least a trilogy, won't happen, and that is actually super duper depressing to me. I'm not going to go into the specifics, but you end this book with basically 3 different plot lines that have great potential material that could be explored, material that I'm 100% certain Jordan planned to be able to explore, that he just wasn't able to write because he didn't live long enough, and that depresses me. The fact that we will never get the rest of these prequels hurts my soul as a new reader of the series, because this book was so great and it sets up such great stuff that could lead all the way up into the Eye of the World. That, man, it's just sad is what it is. And that's really all there is to it. Like I'm sad for that. As for the recommendation, I guess I like this book a lot more than most other people too, so the fact that I'm going to heartily recommend it. As far as Wheel of Time goes, I wouldn't say skip New Spring, it's just the prequel type of thing. No, I wouldn't recommend that at all, because the book's great. I think people should read it. Of course, I'm going to be biased in recommending it after book 5, because that is when I read it. But I think it was a great time to read it. Now, I'm not going to get into the specifics of why that is the case, but given the way that some things happen in the Fires of Heaven and the specific characters being explored in this book, I think the reading New Spring after the Fires of Heaven is just super conducive to a great time, and being able to expand upon the main series and also expand on these specific characters in ways that are just great at the right time that they need to be. Because like I don't know how the series will continue to develop, but I can't imagine that following these characters would be as enjoyable later in the series, for reasons that I'm not going to touch on in this review. So not only do I recommend reading New Spring, I recommend reading it after the Fires of Heaven. So if you've read through the Fires of Heaven and haven't continued on, I would say just take the short trip through New Spring. It's a third of the size of any of those 3 middle books there, 4, 5, or 6. Like, it's going to fly right by. It flew by for me. I'm a slow reader. I've been moving through the Wheel of Time especially really slowly. Like, I took 2 months for both The Shadow Rising and the Fires of Heaven, and I plan to take upwards of that long for Lord of Chaos as well. I read this book in right around a week, so that should really put into perspective how quick it is, how easy it is, and just, at least for me, how enjoyable it was. So, I don't know. I think I have a hot take as far as that's concerned. I would say that New Spring is probably still in my bottom 3 of the 6 books that I've read for this series, so it's not like one of my top 3 Wheel of Time books so far, but it is above some of the other books. Now, of course, I've gotten some flack for hating The Shadow Rising when I do not. I just like it the least of the 6 books that I've read, which is itself a hot take. The Great Hunt is right next to that one. It's in 5th place of the 6 books that I've read, so those are the 2 popular picks for favorites aside from The Gathering Storm in the entire series, so the fact that I have them in the bottom is not exactly a popular opinion. I would be inclined to rank New Spring above both of those 2, The Shadow Rising and The Great Hunt, so being in 4th place of the 6 that I've read. There's the chance that this book and The Great Hunt kind of go back and forth, and I'm not sure which one's better or worse than the other, or which one I prefer over the other, but they're basically around that point. With recency bias considered, I'm going to rank New Spring tentatively at the moment above even The Great Hunt. There's the chance that that could change, but that's how I'm feeling at the moment. So, you know my ranking at this point. It's basically Dragon Reborn and Fires of Heaven at the top, then Eye of the World, then like New Spring and Great Hunt basically together there in that fourth, fifth spot, and Shadow Rising on the bottom. So that's kind of how I feel about the series so far. Be excited for the end of August, and actually that's a lie, for the end of September, when my diaries for Lord of Chaos will be starting to come out. So this video comes out in the middle of August or so, which means probably in about a month I'll be starting Lord of Chaos and buckling down and actually reading a lot of that book ahead of time, so that I can have less diaries on that book as opposed to the last couple books, which took, I think, ultimately longer than they needed to be. So that's all considerations that I'm taking into place. But otherwise, thank you for watching this review, and I'm sorry that I have the hot take on New Spring that I do, but I really enjoyed this book. That's kind of how I feel. I know there are a couple people who are excited by my take on it. Reen, for example, this is, I believe, his number 2 in the series. He has that hot take. So I'm glad that he encouraged me to go into this one with a certain open mind. He kind of talked me through some things. He's been the main one that I've talked to about the series in general, not just posting my chapter thoughts in certain Discord servers. I've like actually discussed the series with him more or less in depth. And up to this point, it was really enlightening to be able to read this book when I did, and I'm glad he enjoyed it so much. I'm glad I enjoyed it so much. I hope everybody else who reads it enjoys it as much as I do, because I really don't believe it deserves the general disregard that a lot of people tend to give it. That being said, thank you for watching this video. I have no idea what the next one is going to be. Stick around for it if you're interested. Either way, I would really appreciate that, but I will talk to you in the next video.